Colonial questions around the time the European Union was founded were given special attention. France and Germany disagreed on how to handle imports from Africa, the Caribbean and Pacific countries, known as the ACP group. Trade relations were first formalized in 1963 with the Yaoundé Convention. Amendments were made several times. Each time the accords were linked with European development funds. This was an aid system for farming and mining exports from the 78 ACP countries and private sector loans. Other poor countries in Asia and Latin America enjoyed no such privileges. With the evolution of the World Trade Organization, this preferential treatment came under pressure. At the European Parliament, a long-time humanitarian aid official points out that the system cannot boast much, since Africa, for instance, is still chronically underdeveloped.
Until now, we've had a closed system of trade preferences between the EU and some partner countries. We can see we've come to the end of that. We can't go on protecting our African friends. Worse than that, they're not strong enough to compete selling their production in any market other than Europe. We can't have a captive system of just them and us. Therefore, they must adapt.
The whole concept of development aid is under revision. Donor countries are increasingly reluctant to come up with the hard cash. A member of the EU ACP Parliamentary Assembly tells it like it is.
It's human when you don't see that what you give is having a result. The person doing the giving gets worried. Of course, we ourselves are partly responsible. The aid hasn't always been managed in the smartest way. Our governments have to make sure that the aid reaches the poorest populations. But on the other hand, the rich countries also have a duty to keep this aid coming, maybe in a different form, notably by encouraging more trade.
Boosting trade is exactly what the Economic Partnership Agreements, EPAs, set out to do. Their coming into force is scheduled for January the 1st, 2008. The idea that African economies should no longer be tied to Europe's apron strings came out of the Cotonou Accords in 2000. Inter-African free trade should be given greater weight in the global commercial balance, explains a Belgian businessman working in Africa.
The time will come when this big village the world has become has to play by economic rules. The African countries have to know that Brazil exists, that New Zealand exists, and that there always has to be competition. In the long term, it's not possible to have a system where Africa gets special treatment ahead of other countries that have their own problems too. We might have to provisionally, but not permanently. Africa has to learn to compete with Brazil and China.
Europe has a strong interest in Africa's economic development when Africans in abject poverty strike out for European shores. Uncontrolled migration. But the transitional measures on offer are hard to get accepted. As the 2008 start of the EPAs moves nearer, their negotiations stretch on. People in the ACP countries are scared of what effect the new rules will have. There is compensation involved, but it's not much reassurance, we hear from a Caribbean representative in Brussels.
Obviously, we have concerns about the treatment of sugar. There is a sugar protocol, the benefits of which should be transposed into an EPA. And some of those benefits are not captured by the European proposal. Also with respect to bananas, we're also major banana producers, and we would have preferred the retention of the managed market. So there's a lot of work remaining to be done to make the European market access offer attractive.
Non-governmental organizations are calling for special arrangements. At Belgium's National Centre for Cooperation and Development, they believe all this is too much and is happening too fast.
We're asking that poor countries have the right to protect themselves from low-price exports from the EU. We want to define a whole series of special products, notably the services sector, so that these wouldn't be liberalised. Leave them the time to develop enough, so that they can then open up collectively to international exchanges in a fair way.
De manière collective, s'ouvrir de manière équitable face aux échanges internationaux.
A lot of the EU ACP Parliamentary Assembly members gathered recently in Wiesbaden, Germany, felt the economic partnership accords coming into force should be pushed back. The European Parliament adopted a resolution saying so.
When you're negotiating, you don't say that we're preparing to fail. But I hope, that's why I keep raising it, and the ACP keep raising it, because there's a lot of work now going on what is possible, and there are possible ways of providing that safety net through something we call GSP+, which gives them Cotonou arrangements until temporarily, just until they can have more time.
But some experts say now is a good time to move things forward because economic conditions are tangibly improving. So this would help boost confidence for African producers, according to this specialist journalist.
There's also good news, and that's that a lot of African countries are developing without aid, solely because the price of raw materials is going up and new partners are coming forward. So their economies are doing better. The growth rate in Africa is averaging more than 6%. Africa's doing better without help.
The European Union appears determined not to turn its back on the historic relationship with Africa. The Prime Minister of the current EU President, Portugal, said recently he would organise an EU-Africa summit for this December. The last one was 7 years ago.
I believe that Europe can no longer afford to be absent from dialogue with Africa. Political, structural, institutional and strategic. I believe it's our mistake, and we are paying the price. Europeans pay a high price, but so do the Africans.
China's increasing potency in Africa is one of the chief reasons for European attention. There's a concern that Beijing could reap the benefit of EU aid to Africa and not care about good governance or human rights. But Mali's ambassador to the EU says China is an asset in developing Africa.
There's an interest certainly marked where these relations are concerned, but I think that this is natural. I believe that our countries are diversifying. Europe's done that perfectly. We now have the problem of erosion with our trade margins, because Europe has diversified its trade, and other countries are asking for the same treatment we've been getting. So it's normal that Africa diversifies.
Here's a continent bursting with potential, with almost 50 countries and some 750 million people. Africans are discovering new opportunities with or without the help of old colonial powers. Hardship, exchange, humanity will all shape the next phase of Africa and Europe's intercontinental history.